Hello and welcome. Today, we're examining one of the most pressing security concerns facing Europe and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Recent warnings from senior defense officials across the continent suggest that the timeline for potential Russian military aggression against alliance members may be dramatically shorter than previously anticipated, with some experts now pointing to 2026 as a possible flashpoint. The alarm bells are ringing loudest from Germany, where Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has made some remarkably candid statements about the threat landscape. In a comprehensive interview with the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung published on November 15th, Pistorius revealed assessments suggesting that Russia could be militarily prepared to launch operations against NATO territory far sooner than most analysts had predicted. The interview, conducted to mark the 70th anniversary of the Bundeswehr, touched on numerous aspects of German military readiness, but it was his comments about Russian intentions that drew the most attention from security observers worldwide. According to Pistorius, Russian President Vladimir Putin makes no secret of his imperial ambitions in which the freedom and democratic order that Europeans currently enjoy simply have no place. The minister emphasized that responding to this emerging threat requires urgent action to strengthen defensive capabilities across the alliance. He acknowledged, frankly, that Germany's armed forces have suffered from decades of neglect, with infrastructure falling into disrepair and personnel numbers being drastically reduced over the years. While he noted that political parties across the democratic spectrum have recognized the need for decisive action, and have begun changing course in recent years, he stressed that the pace of transformation must accelerate significantly. The timeline projections for potential Russian aggression have been steadily shrinking. Military experts and intelligence services initially estimated that Russia would need until around 2029 to rebuild its armed forces, to the point where launching an attack on a NATO member state in the east would become feasible. However, more recent assessments have revised these estimates considerably. Some analysts now believe this threshold could be reached as early as 2028, while certain military historians have suggested even more alarming possibilities, arguing that Europe may have already experienced its last peaceful summer for quite some time. Pistorius was not the only senior European official to sound the alarm in mid-November. Andreas Kubilius, the European Commissioner for Defense, spoke at a conference in Vilnius, Lithuania, on November 17th, where he referenced intelligence assessments from multiple European Union member states. According to Kubilius, intelligence services in Germany, Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands have all indicated that Putin could be ready to test Article 5 of the NATO treaty within the next 2 to 4 years, well before 2030. Article 5, of course, is the collective defense provision that states an attack on one alliance member is considered an attack on all members. Kubilius specifically identified the 3 Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania as the most probable targets of any Russian aggression. However, he emphasized that regardless of which specific nation Russia might choose to target, such an attack would constitute aggression not just against that individual country, but against the entire NATO alliance and the European Union as a whole. This assessment aligns with long-standing concerns about the vulnerability of the Baltic region, which shares borders with Russia and has limited geographic depth for defensive operations. The reasoning behind these threat assessments relates directly to the transformation of Russia's economy and military-industrial complex. Russia has effectively shifted to a wartime economic footing, with defense production ramping up dramatically. Kubilius explained that even if a ceasefire or peace agreement were established in Ukraine, Russia would likely continue producing and stockpiling weapons at current elevated rates. This creates a situation where Russia would eventually accumulate sufficient military capabilities to launch new aggressive operations. Intelligence reports indicate that Russia's defense industrial base is now producing substantial quantities of tanks, armored vehicles, and missile systems on an ongoing basis. These warnings from European officials echo and expand upon statements made by other senior leaders over the past several months. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly expressed concern that at least some NATO members are not moving quickly enough to prepare for potential Russian aggression. In February, he offered a blunt assessment of European military capabilities, stating that in terms of troop strength, combat forces, naval power, air power, and unmanned systems, Europe appears weak. He later warned that unless Russia is stopped in Ukraine, Putin will continue pushing the war deeper and wider into additional territories. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has made similar points in his public statements. Speaking at Chatham House in London, Rutte highlighted the stark disparity in ammunition production, noting that Russia manufactures in 3 months what the entire NATO alliance produces in a full year. He cited projections that Russia's defense industry could produce approximately 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 Iskander missiles in a single year. Rutte warned that Russia could be ready to employ military force against NATO within approximately 5 years, adding that the distinction between eastern and western parts of the alliance has effectively disappeared since modern Russian missiles can reach European capitals in mere minutes. In response to these mounting threats, numerous European nations have significantly increased their defense investments and accelerated military modernization programs. Germany represents perhaps the most dramatic example of this shift. Prior to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Germany invested only approximately 1.5% of its gross domestic product in defense. Shortly after the invasion began, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced that Germany would dramatically increase defense spending to exceed 2% of GDP, fundamentally reversing decades of German security policy. This reversal was necessary because prevailing assumptions that Russia would never attack NATO and that large-scale ground wars in Europe were relegated to history books proved dangerously incorrect. Germany is now planning to substantially increase its defense budget from approximately 86 billion euros in 2025 to roughly 152 billion euros by 2029. These investments aim to transform the Bundeswehr into the strongest conventional military force in Europe within that time frame. The head of Rheinmetall, Germany's largest defense contractor and the 5th largest in Europe, has stated publicly that he believes this ambitious goal is achievable. Beyond simply increasing spending, Germany has implemented significant structural reforms to its armed forces. In April 2024, Pistorius announced that the Bundeswehr would transition from having 2 separate military command centers to a single unified operational command structure. Previously, one command center handled planning and execution of deployments abroad, while another focused on territorial defense of Germany itself. The new unified structure is designed to enable faster decision-making and greater operational efficiency. Additionally, Germany's Cyber and Information Warfare Department is being elevated to become a full-fledged 4th branch of the armed forces, joining the Army, Navy, and Air Force. This organizational change reflects Germany's understanding of the growing importance of electronic warfare, cybersecurity, and hybrid threats in modern conflict. Major procurement contracts are already being executed. Rheinmetall received a contract worth 8.5 billion euros to deliver 155mm artillery shells to the German armed forces, with deliveries commencing in 2025. Berlin is also pursuing acquisitions of additional main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, F-35 fighter aircraft, and Chinook helicopters. The scale of investment represents a historic shift in German defense policy. To address personnel requirements, Germany has approved a new national military service plan designed to boost active duty troop numbers. The plan mandates that all German men aged 18 and above complete a questionnaire regarding their fitness and suitability for military service. Military screening processes are scheduled to begin in 2027. This initiative should play a crucial role in Germany's efforts to build sufficient force structure. The goal is to achieve a reserve component exceeding 200,000 soldiers and an active duty force of between 210,000 and 220,000 personnel by 2030. Germany also plans to deploy a fully manned brigade to Lithuania as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence on the alliance's eastern flank. Despite the ambitious goals, the shrinking timeline presents obvious challenges. If Russia were to launch operations in 2028, 2027, or even 2026, Germany and other NATO members would have significantly less time than anticipated to complete their modernization programs. Nevertheless, Pistorius has expressed confidence that even if a Russian attack materializes sooner rather than later, Germany is in a considerably stronger position than it was several years ago. He emphasized that the Bundeswehr is significantly better equipped than media reports sometimes suggest, and that the armed forces are steadily gaining capability. He noted that Germany has concluded far more contracts for weapons systems than in previous years and has clear plans for increasing personnel and upgrading infrastructure. Even before the new conscription system takes effect, the number of applications and recruits has been rising, creating noticeable positive effects within the ranks. Commenting on NATO's collective defensive capabilities, Pistorius stated that the alliance should not create the impression that it cannot defend itself. NATO does possess considerable deterrent potential, both conventional and nuclear. The alliance fields combat-ready armed forces, though he acknowledged they need to be equipped even more thoroughly. This represents a recurring theme throughout his public statements. NATO is capable of defending itself today, but continued acceleration of military modernization efforts is absolutely essential to ensure the alliance is in the strongest possible position when and if Russian aggression occurs. Pistorius has emphasized the importance of rapid, efficient, and strategic procurement processes. He called on defense industry firms to accelerate their own timelines for expanding production capacity. Germany has created conditions for long-term procurement reliability through sectoral policy adjustments and clear commitments to sustained defense spending. Legislation designed to accelerate planning and procurement procedures is expected to pass through Parliament. However, companies themselves must also move faster in establishing and expanding production facilities. The sense of urgency permeates all levels of the defense establishment. Poland has emerged as a leader in defense, spending not just within Europe, but across the entire NATO alliance. Poland plans to dedicate approximately 4.7% of its GDP to military investments in 2025, the highest proportion of any alliance member. This substantial commitment reflects Poland's geographic proximity to both Russia and Belarus, as well as its historical experience with Russian imperialism. Warsaw has been acquiring advanced American weapons systems, including M1 Abrams tanks, F-35 fighter aircraft, and HIMARS rocket artillery systems, while also investing heavily in domestic defense production capabilities. The nature of potential future conflict is a key consideration in these preparations. Russian military operations in Ukraine have demonstrated heavy reliance on long-range missile strikes and massive drone swarms to attack targets deep behind front lines. Russia has repeatedly launched cruise missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles against Ukrainian cities, energy infrastructure, and other strategic targets located hundreds of miles from the front. NATO nations must assume that similar tactics would be employed against them. Modern Russian missiles can travel at hypersonic speeds, meaning the flight time from launch to impact on European capitals could be measured in single-digit minutes. There is effectively no longer a meaningful distinction between the eastern and western portions of the alliance when considering missile threats. Drone warfare represents another critical area where Europe needs rapid capability development. In September, when several Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, NATO members scrambled fighter aircraft, but successfully intercepted only 4 of the intruding unmanned vehicles. By contrast, Ukraine regularly defeats hundreds of Russian drones in a single night through its sophisticated air defense network. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen pointed out at the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen that Ukraine is currently the world's only genuine expert in counter-drone operations, because Ukrainian forces confront Russian drone attacks nearly every day. She emphasized that Europe needs to absorb all the experience, new technology, and innovation emerging from Ukraine and incorporate it into European rearmament programs. Pistorius addressed the drone challenge in his interview, noting that the war in Ukraine clearly demonstrates the enormous importance of unmanned systems in modern warfare. However, he also noted that heavy equipment, including howitzers, tanks, and manned aircraft, will continue playing crucial roles. Future warfare will be combined arms in nature, incorporating ground forces, armor, artillery, air power, cyberspace operations, and unmanned systems. The drone technology sector is experiencing remarkably short innovation cycles, with significant technological changes occurring every 2 to 3 months. This rapid pace means that stockpiling large quantities of current-generation drones makes little economic sense, as they could become obsolete quickly. Instead, Germany plans to pursue new procurement methods, bringing end users and developers together from the earliest stages of development to ensure state-of-the-art designs can be rapidly mass-produced when needed for defense scenarios. The Baltic states face perhaps the most immediate potential threat. All 3 nations share borders with Russia or Russian ally Belarus, and their geographic positions make them potentially vulnerable to rapid military operations. NATO has substantially reinforced its presence in the region through enhanced forward presence battle groups led by various framework nations. These multinational forces are designed to demonstrate NATO's commitment to collective defense while providing credible combat power that would be immediately engaged in any Russian attack, thereby invoking Article 5 from the outset of hostilities. Nevertheless, defending the Baltic region against a determined Russian assault would be extraordinarily challenging given the limited geographic depth and the difficulty of rapidly reinforcing forces through the narrow Suwalki Gap corridor connecting the Baltics to Poland. Some security analysts argue that hybrid warfare between Russia and NATO has effectively already begun. Russia has been implicated in numerous incidents, including sabotage operations targeting infrastructure in NATO countries, cyber attacks against government and private sector networks, disinformation campaigns designed to undermine public confidence in democratic institutions, and other activities that fall below the threshold of armed attack, but nevertheless represent hostile actions. Russian military aircraft and drones have repeatedly violated NATO airspace, whether through deliberate provocation or operational spillover from the Ukraine conflict. These incidents test alliance resolve and gather intelligence about NATO response procedures and capabilities. The human cost of any future conflict would likely be devastating. The war in Ukraine has already resulted in more than 50,000 civilian casualties and approximately 400,000 military casualties, according to various estimates. While NATO's collective military power would likely prevail in any direct conventional confrontation with Russia, the process of achieving victory could involve enormous destruction of infrastructure and tragic loss of life, particularly in frontline states. The more effectively NATO nations prepare their defenses today, the more lives can potentially be saved if war does come. Strong defensive preparations also enhance deterrence by convincing potential adversaries that aggression would fail while incurring unacceptable costs. Looking ahead to 2030, Pistorius outlined an ambitious vision for Germany's armed forces. New F-35 fighter jets and Chinook helicopters will be operational. The Army will field Leopard 2, A-8 main battle tanks, and Sky Ranger air defense systems. The Lithuanian-based brigade will be fully established and operational, serving as a model for other deployments. Pistorius expressed hope that NATO will maintain the unity it currently enjoys, and that young Germans now entering military service will look back with pride on their contributions to national defense. These plans assume that sufficient time remains to implement them, which depends heavily on whether the most pessimistic intelligence assessments about Russian timelines prove accurate. Other NATO members have similarly ambitious plans extending to 2030 or beyond. However, the shrinking timeline between now and potential Russian aggression means that many nations may need to reconsider their priorities and focus resources on the most urgent requirements. Speed has become the essential factor. Even if expert predictions prove somewhat inaccurate and Russia doesn't attack until 2029 or 2030, that still leaves remarkably little time for countries across Europe to prepare comprehensively. The stakes could hardly be higher, and the international security environment remains more volatile than at any time since the end of the Cold War.